When I first heard about 9/11, I was a young mom. I had 2 little kids, and I wasn't working. I was working at raising them. But it was morning, and I woke up, and I usually turned on the news while I was getting ready for the day. And I remember Katie Couric. She was a really popular show where she was looking all concerned, and then it flashed to one of the towers, and there was a big hole in one of the towers. And then very shortly after, the second tower was hit, and then everybody knew it was an act of terror. People always overreact, and so you worry about making sure that we don't get ourselves involved in something we shouldn't, and that we make sure we understand the situation. And I think I remember most just thinking, somebody's really upset with us. Why? Is it true? Are we doing something? I just wanted to find out more information. When I was growing up, the quote unquote bad guy in all the movies was a Russian, right? I don't know, they were always trying to destroy our democracy, right? And when the Berlin Wall fell, the Russian wasn't the enemy in every show. And now a lot of the TV shows you watch, the terrorist is the enemy. They're always trying a bomb or trying to destroy America for some reason. On top of that, it opened up this whole world of the Middle East and the problems that are going on there. There's got to be some truth behind this if these people are doing this. And I wanted to just learn more. And it also showed me how America can come together. People were so patriotic and loving towards each other. Terrorism is something I think that is the world's answer to a superpower. In a way, there will always be people that are going to try and attack. It just increases a lot of racism towards the Muslim religion, and that's kind of a sad thing because those terrorists don't represent the whole of the Islamic world. Everyone realizes that even though sometimes you might think you can go into a country and give them a new government and get rid of a very bad one, we thought we could go in, liberate them, and give them democracy and things would be okay. But I certainly thought we'd be in and out, but we've been there and we're still there today. Also, we lost a lot of our privacy through the Homeland Security Act, but man, we just said yes, yes, and it took away a lot of our privacy. So we have to be careful with that too, and I think Americans are kind of understanding that as well. We just been talking to teachers about 9/11, and we realized that this new crop of kids, sophomores coming into Murray High, they weren't even born when 9/11 happened, which is great because we can move on and we've done a lot of things, and we haven't had any such major attacks since then. But at the same time, the further you remove yourself from history, the less you understand and appreciate it, and you might start to make the same mistakes or take things for granted. So that's where we come in as history teachers. It's just really important to try and keep the memory alive and make sure we have those museums and the specials on TV to teach people how horrible it was and why it happened and what we've done since then. Because memory fades, and if you weren't there, it doesn't mean as much to you as if you were there. So,
I came to school that morning, as always, 6 hours early. This was the old Murray High School, and our copy room was in the library, and I ran over to run a few copies before school, and our librarian always kept the TV on, and I was leaving the copy center. He said, "Paul, come here. You won't believe what happened. A plane just flew into the World Trade Towers, and it had just happened not long before, and we were talking about it, and the second plane flew into the tower, and I remember turning to Mr. Imlay and saying, we're at war. I don't know who we're at war with, but we are now at war, and that's how I found out about it. We watched the second plane fly live into the tower. It's a little bit of a shock. I've been here 33 years. I wasn't a new teacher by any stretch of the imagination. We were ordered not to let students watch anything on television because it might be too big of a shock to their system. I, of course, kept my television on all day. Should have been fired for that probably because I'm a bad person, but something that important happens, You're high school students. You can deal with the emotions of it. It was just too important to ignore. Obviously, some were upset. Everyone was a little bit shocked. The footage is about as dramatic as it gets. When you see people, I mean, you see what look like little bundles of ash falling off of the tower, and you realize it's people falling to their deaths. That is pretty shocking. But I think, I don't know, when you have 15-year-old students, they don't have the historical context to fully appreciate. The longer you live, the more you understand this is one of those moments when the planet Earth tilted on its axis. Things changed. I mean, it ushered in a new era. Well, I was shocked, obviously. And I generally don't have emotions. I've tried to model my life after Mr. Spock. But I will remember. All day long, I just felt numb. I realized the world had changed in a significant way. And I'm not naive. I realized there are, even back then, a lot of people who did not care much for the United States of America. But this is one of those moments when I cried like a baby and wasn't even that embarrassed about it. I was watching the news, and they were talking about how other countries around the world were reacting to this. And they showed, I still get emotional about this, because we're not going to find these kinds of alliances around the world anymore. Everybody hopes, the United States will sink into the ocean. But they were showing the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. And this was the big changing of the guard, and there's the band, the British Marines band, and they started playing. Usually they're playing God Save the Queen. They played the Star-Spangled Banner. And I'm not a patriot. I don't even like my country. We're a bunch of idiots. And I started crying like a baby that another country would reach out and say, you know what, you're not alone in this one. And I'm crying right now. Feel like an idiot. But that was a long time ago. And there were other gestures like that from other countries as well. And that was the emotional response that I had. It was after a long, long day. It was a surreal day. I will never forget this. We say this is how the world works, and we get so used to the background noise, we forget it. But I remember going home and standing on my front lawn and looking out over the Great Salt Lake, where you can watch all the approaches into the Salt Lake Airport. And there's always jet contrails in the air, always. That is the first time in my life when the sky was blue and not one jet contrail. Every plane in the country had been grounded. And it was surreal. It was just strange. And then that night, to hear the British band play the Star-Spangled Banner, gotta tell you, hit me there. Oh, New York, it's full of people with East Coast personalities. They're rude, abrasive, nasty people. No, I don't mean that, of course. I didn't have much of an opinion. I've seen the pictures, I knew what they were, and that was about it. I mean, the thing about the Twin Towers is, Osama bin Laden is aiming at those evil Americans. He killed people from how many different nations, including a number of Muslims. I'm going beyond your question. Didn't have much of an opinion about I didn't think of them as the twin pillars of evil, if that's what you mean. No. Yeah, the world, it's a different world now. I got stuck on Vancouver Island once, well before 9/11. Couldn't find another plane off the island, so I had to wait until the next morning. I was locked in the Vancouver International Airport all by myself overnight. He opened a restaurant bar, let me sleep on the leather sofa in there, said, if you just want to spend a few hours here, I'll open it in the morning, just don't drink any alcohol, which, by the way, I did not. You can't imagine that in a post-9/11 world. It's just impossible to believe. The old ways that we used to think about warfare between nations, alliances, geopolitical strategies, all of that was affected by 9/11. The way that policing is done around the world, sometimes for the good in terms of cooperation between countries. And I know someone your age says, well, because you didn't know the world before that, but it has changed things forever in some ways. We used to think you go to war, there's the enemy, that's who we fight. It's hard to do that, in a world where war is fought through terrorism. Historical context is hard, and a couple of teachers that have been here since the American Civil War, Mr. Wood and I, Miss Lloyd, the school administration thinks I'm an idiot because I don't want to use a computer to sweep the floor. But the one advantage of being older than dirt is that you really can see what has changed and what has not. And for someone who was born after 9, I mean, that's ancient history. If it happens before your birth, well, that happened back in the time of George Washington or Napoleon Bonaparte or Adam. And it really was yesterday. I can't believe that I still react emotionally. You guys have heard about it, but sophomores now, it's something that's in the history books. And if it's in the history books, it has to be boring, and who cares? But it really did change fundamentally the way, come on, if you've ever hopped on an airplane and had to go through, 2-hour security lines, that didn't happen before 9/11. That was something that we were forced into. But that's just one trivial example. I've been around since the French Revolution, and I can count on both hands the number of events like 9/11 that really, you just know. The moment it happens, the moment you hear about it, you say, this changes everything in some ways forever. And it really was that important of an event.
I was on my way to work. I was driving to work pretty early, and I heard a report on the radio that said that an airplane had crashed into one of the Twin Towers, and then shortly after that, they said a second plane hit, and I immediately thought, wow, we're at war. This is crazy. It was pretty traumatic, and just to think that our country was at war on our own soil, that was kind of scary. It affected me as a teacher because I went into school that day. I only had one thing on my mind, and I think most teachers were the same way. They just wanted to watch the news and see what was happening. In fact, they come up to me and said, I was your student on 9/11, and I'll never forget that you told me, Mr. Moffett, this is going to change the world. And it did. It changed our world a lot. The atmosphere at school changed a lot. I remember having an assembly right after 9/11, and they said the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'll never forget, it was the first time I remember the students were all just really quiet and respectful, and I had never experienced that. Usually we'd say the pledge or sing the national anthem and everybody was not really paying attention, but that changed the atmosphere of the whole school. Everybody paid attention, and it was very... in 2001, I had been teaching for 4 years. So I was pretty fresh out of college, probably about 30 years old. I was 30 years old. I remember when I was 16 years old, I took a trip with my family to New York City. And the Twin Towers, they were sort of the iconic skyline of New York City. That was a huge part of what I remembered New York City as being. Well, one of the biggest changes that I noticed from 9/11 obviously is the security at the airports. I mean, never before did we have to show up to the airport so early. Never had to take our shoes off to go through security. It changed it a lot. I would say 9/11 is probably the single biggest historic event that's happened in my lifetime. It taught me a great deal of respect for our country and for those that serve our country. And I would hope that students would, as they learn about 9/11, would also have that same respect. We have a lot of freedoms in our country that sometimes I think are taken for granted, and I don't ever want to take those for granted. At the end.